The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
So UC Berkeley has had a bunch of news lately. We had the UC Berkeley incident with this hot dog vendor who had his money seized and was given a ticket, then raised over, last we checked, over $70,000. Don't know how much it is now. They also had a controversy because Ben Shapiro spoke at UC Berkeley not that long ago. And now there's even more controversy at UC Berkeley because the organizers of what they're calling Free Speech Week at the university are saying they are having the event in spite of the fact that the school said you were not going to be able to rent or use some of the large indoor venues that the school has for your events. There's a sophomore who's a member of the Berkeley Patriot who said that, this is the group, by the way, that invited Milo Yiannopoulos previously. They said they want Ann Coulter there. They want Stephen Bannon there. They want Pam Geller there, and that they will hold the events outside if they have to, because the crowds, I guess, will be big, and they need really big indoor venues, I guess, to accommodate them or whatever. The events were promised by Yiannopoulos after his own speech was canceled in the midst of violent protests. And of course, that was when the anti-fascist protesters started smashing windows. They were lighting fires. I said very clearly, very unequivocally back then that I am against that type of protesting. And interestingly enough, not everybody agrees with me. We do have people in our audience who I think have sort of more anarchist tendencies who say, no, this is a move towards fascism, and it is acceptable to light fires or to smash windows merely because Milo Yiannopoulos is going to show up. Now, I think it's interesting because even if you can make an equivalency between political violence and physical violence, right? As we talked about earlier in the week with the whole punching Nazis thing, if you want to defend punching a Nazi who has not exerted physical violence over you, what argument do you make? You say, well, Nazism is violent, so merely seeing a Nazi with an armband is enough of a violent act to warrant punching them. If you're going to make the same argument, which is merely the ideology of Milo Yiannopoulos or Ann Coulter or whoever on campus is violent enough to warrant destruction of property, you can make that argument, but I think you're losing the debate when you do that. I think when someone shows up to speak and you burn property or smash windows, you're basically saying, I can't counter their argument on their merits, so I'm destroying property. I'm not saying that that's the case, but I'm saying that's the appearance, and that's why I'm against it.
And obviously these people like Milo Yiannopoulos, Ben Shapiro, and Coulter, they're not Nazis. I mean, we may have disagreements with their viewpoints,
Sure.
but it's just one of those things that's like, where do you draw the line? If you're willing to punch Nazis because you think that their beliefs are so violent and deplorable, will you just extend that to anyone with whom you have disagreements?
Well, that's why I think that this is problematic, because I understand that no one in life is going to be consistent 100% of the time, right? As many people, including Milo Yiannopoulos, like to say, people are messy, right? There are inconsistencies.
Messy and complex.
Messy and complex, right. But it's very easy for me to say, well, if someone is showing up and they're not advocating for physical violence and they're merely speaking, my strategy for all of them is to counter their arguments with better arguments. Not, okay, well, if it's Milo Yiannopoulos, then we smash windows. If it's Ben Shapiro, we just light dog poop on fire. And then if it's Ann Coulter, then we flip over police cars. But if it's Steve Bannon, then we argue with Steve, right? I think that there needs to be some more consistency here. And for me, the consistent argument is you only use physical violence to defend from physical violence, and you use intellectual arguments and debate to defend against bad ideas that show up. That's my perspective.
And I keep going back to this counterproductive thing, but I don't think Milo Yiannopoulos would be nearly as culturally relevant if it wasn't for him going to a speech and it getting shut down because there's so many violent protests and the police get involved. And I think even he recognizes that himself. If like he says to the people that oppose him, you want to make me irrelevant, just ignore me. Not nearly as many people would show up and pay as much attention to this.
And it's weird he would admit that because the guy clearly wants attention. He thrives off of attention, but I think it's absolutely true. And if you can counter the argument, then that is going to do much more to take away the interest in the other person. Because imagine that Milo Yiannopoulos shows up at all these speeches and people calmly show up and they're well prepared and they say, hey, here's the reasons why what you're saying really doesn't make sense. It's going to be kind of anticlimactic in a way, but it's going to make it so that when he goes to his next speech, people don't say, do you know what happened last time Milo showed up? All hell broke loose on campus. I've got to go and see what's going to happen. No, people would say, dude's ideas have been debunked. Every time he shows up at a college, his ideas are debunked. I don't need to show up. That's really what it is that we want. Delegitimize the ideas.
Leave it as a battle of ideas. That's perfectly healthy. I went to a panel earlier this week and saw Dave Rubin speak, and I was able to go through the whole thing without setting any fires.
Right. That's true. But that was because you were wearing a flame retardant suit on purpose. You knew you had to contain yourself.
Yeah. I mean, I had the lighters, I had the gasoline, everything ready to go. But...
No, but you were doused in fire suppressors. No, that made a big difference. Okay. You might remember 8 months ago. You might not. But you might remember that 8 months ago, I told you that this crew was spending a period of time on a Hawaiian volcano simulating what it would be like to have the isolation of being on Mars. They have finished now, okay? They finished on the 17th, which was Saturday. And they've returned to civilization. This was the 5th mock Mars mission of the NASA-funded program. And the idea was figure out some of the communication delay impacts, because when you are traveling to Mars or on Mars, you will have to be dealing with a communication delay, a back and forth communication delay. Figure out some of the psychological impact of only communicating in person with this very small group of people. This was 6 astronauts, and it is a very, very interesting study. 4 men and 2 women lived in isolation from the rest of the planet. They could only they could only eat shelf-stable foods and occasionally some vegetables that they were able to grow, sort of lab-grown vegetables. They had a 20-minute delay, 10 minutes in each direction. So you send a message to Earth or Mission Control or whatever, takes 10 minutes to get to them. Presumably, they might need a little bit of time to formulate a response, but when they do, it's another 10 minutes for the message to get back. So it's a minimum 20-minute round trip for every single communication. And they dealt with all of that. And whenever they exited their little lab, they had to, or the dome, they had to put on spacesuits. They weren't actually necessary, of course. They were in Hawaii, not on Mars. But the idea was to simulate that they would have to do that anytime they go outside. And now we are going to start learning, Pat, about the psychological impact of this.
Maybe this is a side point, but I wonder if there was like an actual medical emergency or a reason for people to contact Earth, if they would still have to wait that 20 minutes, because that's, on the one hand, that's how it would be if you were on Mars, right?
Sure.
But on the other, it's just a simulation, and these aren't the people that would actually be the astronauts who go up there.
I assume that because this is just a test, they probably had some signal for like some kind of safe word, like this is not part of the experiment.
Yeah.
Right? That we have a major injury and we need help right now type of thing. Because I don't know, we all know what would happen if there was really a medical calamity and you couldn't even get an answer back in 20
even
minutes.
Though you could.
Never mind getting help there because you're on another planet. So I assume that in that case, they would be able to communicate.
Well, they grew plenty of vegetables, which seems nice. It's like a little taste from home, and that's what we'd have to do. I mean, we can't bring enough food up there in its raw form to sustain us. We'd have to have, the necessary means to grow it up there, right?
And that is complex. That is complex when you think about, there's this, I forget the name of it or the ratio or whatever it's called, but there is sort of a mathematical consideration when you think about space travel that you have to weigh how much stuff you want to bring with you to make your life easier with the reality that everything you add increases the amount of fuel you need in order to make it to wherever you're going because it's more mass that has to be moved. And I think what is being sort of thought about in terms of the food thing for Mars would be figuring out the lightest, in terms of mass, right? The lightest way, the lightest source materials that could grow you the most food. So I assume that this would mean seeds and seedlings and I don't know what else, but I'm sure that there's a lot of math involved in whether it makes sense to bring tomatoes and cucumber seeds or do you bring cucumbers and tomato seeds or whatever, just as one dumb example.
Well, I do have an idea for the fertilizer.
Yeah.
I mean,
okay, well that might be
we're bringing it with us.
That might be no. Actually, that's completely uncontroversial. Like that's how it's part of what they're thinking about. Yeah. Okay. Here's just a really wacky story that shows us the depths of hate that some people are in. Remember that guy, Dylan Roof? He's the guy who killed 9 people at the Charleston church. He wants to fire his attorneys because his attorneys are Indian and Jewish, and he doesn't like Indian people or Jews. He filed a handwritten note earlier this week seeking that his attorneys be removed and be replaced with others. These are court-appointed attorneys. He's already been sentenced to death in January of 2015. And he wrote, "My 2 currently appointed attorneys, Alexandra Yates and Sapna Mirchandani, are Jewish and Indian respectively. It is therefore quite literally impossible that they and I could have the same interests relating to my case." It's interesting because from a legal perspective, the lawyer's identity is supposed to be completely independent from how they would function defending or prosecuting a case, client, company, whatever, right? The idea is there is a legal responsibility from the lawyer. Once it has been established who your client is, your responsibility is to them legally. If you act in the interests of any other parties, you're actually violating the bar association guidelines for whatever state you're licensed to practice law in. So there's actually already a legal system that says it actually can't be considered that a Jewish lawyer might not have the interests of a white supremacist client in mind. Now, of course, we have to consider, even if that's the way the law is written, even if those are the guidelines for attorneys, you know who you're defending, right? Even at the subconscious level, you might be affected.
Well, I mean, they're going to care less that he's a white supremacist and more that he killed 9 people.
I agree.
But they're also defense lawyers, and they're well trained in this, right? So, I mean, they've been through this kind of thing before. Maybe not to this extent, maybe not this high profile of a case, but they know what they're dealing with.
I don't want to attack anyone because I think that the work that public defenders do is very valuable. And I want to be super clear. This is not an attack on any individual. Oh, yeah. But there is the idea that highly paid private defense attorneys are better equipped to handle cases than less well-paid public defenders, although that might be, I don't even know, that could be a stereotype. It could be a law of averages. That doesn't mean any individual public defender is not going to be able to do their job competently.
Right, because you think there's more money to be made in other realms of law, but it doesn't mean that, you know, someone weighs that more than the duty that they have to serve the public.
I agree.
You know,
and if most people who are public defenders are there by choice, and you would imagine that that means they aren't there to do a terrible job or to not defend cases the way that they would defend them if they were being more highly compensated. Maybe I'm idealistic or naive, I don't know, but I hope that that's the case.
And a lot of these public defenders have a lot of cases to deal with, so they have to budget their time accordingly.
Yeah.
But with someone on death row, I mean, I'd imagine you have all the time that you need, right?
I have no idea. I genuinely, like, if you are a public defender working with someone who's been sentenced to death, does that become your only case? I don't know. I mean, there can be very long periods of time between when you even have court dates and have to do anything. It sort of would make sense. You are working other cases, but I don't know. We're kind of getting into the logistics of public defense. Right. There's a really good documentary on Netflix about 3 public defenders in, I don't remember if it's Mississippi or Alabama. I don't remember the name of the documentary, but I think if you Google Netflix documentary, Alabama public defenders or Mississippi public defenders, you'll find it. It's really, really good. Very good documentary that gives interesting insight into how overworked a lot of these public defenders are. Okay, so anyway, Dylan Roof, guy's consistent, right?
Right. I mean, does he want the death penalty, you think, at this point? It seemed as if in that interrogation video after he was arrested, he seemed a little bit remorseful. Like he didn't realize that he had killed 9 people and wasn't really believing the cops when they said that he did that.
I don't know. I mean, you'd have to believe that he had sort of like one of these stress-induced blackouts or temporary psychosis or amnesia, global temporary amnesia. I don't remember what it's called. That can happen in moments of particular agitation. I have no idea.
Appropriately, that you can't remember what it's called.
Maybe. Appropriately, I can't remember what the type of amnesia I'm referring to is called. Yeah, I'm against the death penalty, to be super clear, but I do believe that Dylan Roof needs to be locked up for the rest of his life. That would be what I believe. If you disagree, if you believe that Dylan Roof's punishment should be less than life in prison without parole, explain it to me. Let me know why, and we can follow up on that. All right, that's it. We'll talk to you on Monday.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.